10-Minute Jazz Lesson Podcast, episode 384. Hey, everybody, welcome back to episode 384 of the 10-Minute Jazz Lesson Podcast. It's the third week of the month, so you know what that means. We're doing our lick of the month, and we're going to base these licks off of our studies of Lydian, both Lydian Major and Lydian Dominant, and we're going to take a look at a couple of lines that should be of use to you over the great jazz standard Autumn Leaves. But before we get into the show, as always, just wanted to remind you this is a listener-supported podcast, which means we don't do any advertisements on the show, and the way that we stay alive and keep these episodes coming out is through your generous support in the form of a small monthly donation. You do get, in return for that donation, a PDF and audio examples to every single episode. We have quite the backlog over on Patreon, which is the platform that we use to support the show. So if you want to become a supporter, get the PDF from this episode and every episode that we've ever done, head over to our website, 10minutejazzlesson.com, click on one of the Patreon banners, or simply go to patreon.com and search for the 10-Minute Jazz Lesson Podcast. Wanted to give a quick shout out to some new patrons this week. Thank you to our two new $5 members, David and Raphael. Thank you so much for joining up to support the podcast and become part of the 10-Minute Jazz Lesson family. And of course, to the over 350 people we have over there supporting us, thank you. We could not do this without you. So again, patreon.com, 10-Minute Jazz Lesson Podcast. All right. So we've been talking this month about Lydian and the Lydian sound, one of my favorite sounds to utilize when I'm improvising, and I think one of the more interesting sounds. So we've covered how to form the Lydian scale based off of the modes of a major scale and a melodic minor scale. And now it's time to actually put that stuff into action. So I've prepared a couple of lines for you this week, and we are going to use the first 4 measures of Autumn Leaves. And the reason that we're going to do that is it's actually the perfect chord progression to use both our Lydian dominant and to use a Lydian mode over a major chord. So what are the first 4 chords of Autumn Leaves and why are they so perfect? So we start with a 2-5-1 in concert B flat major. So that's perfect. Over the 5 chord, we can play Lydian. And then in the 4th measure, we actually go to the 4 chord in the key of B flat major, which is E flat major 7. Now, this is like serving it up on a silver plate for us because we are naturally using the Lydian mode in this chord progression. So here it's perfectly acceptable and probably preferable to play Lydian. So we have 2, 5, 1, 4. And that means that if we write a little bit of vocabulary over these 4 measures, we can both use the Lydian dominant in bar 2, and then we can use Lydian major in bar 4. We could use the Lydian mode of concert B flat because the chord is right there for us. All right, so if you look at your PDF for this week's episode, you are going to find 2 pieces of vocabulary over these exact measures. So let's take a look at the first one. So in the first line, we're starting over the 2 chord with a very typical piece of vocabulary. Okay, nothing wild there. But then when we get to the second bar, that's where we want to start using this Lydian dominant sound. And you could hear right off the bat, I'm using one of those structures I showed you. So it's a concert F7 sharp 11 chord, and I am using a triad based off of the second. So I'm using a G major triad over it. And that communicates Lydian very well. Now I'm switching into one of my other structures, which is the same triad, but augmented. And I'm starting on the and of 3 and playing that augmented triad. 1, 2, 3. Okay, so that whole measure sounds like this. And that is very Lydian-ish. And then we resolve. And then when we hit our 4 chord, we're going to do the same thing. So I'm starting with a triad, major triad based off of the second. And then I'm jumping up to that sharp 11. And then we're finishing off with a few notes over the next chord. Okay. So if we listen to the whole line, you'll hear it has a lot of Lydian. It's very Lydian heavy. And I'll play that on saxophone later on in the episode so you can hear it in time and all the way through on an instrument that I'm better at than the piano. But for now, let's jump into the second line. So in this one, we're utilizing a lot of the same sounds, but it's just a different piece of vocabulary. So over the 2 chord, again, nondescript, just piece of vocabulary that I came up with. But I'm leading to the first note you're going to hear over the second measure is the sharp 11. And then I'm using that augmented triad based off of the second of that F chord. Now I'm switching to the pure major triad. So let's hear that together. And then we're resolving. And then look, I'm leading to the sharp 11 again over the 4 chord. And what I'm using there is that minor triad based off of the 7th of that major chord. And then I'm doing more of that at the end of the measure. Okay, so let's hear that entire thing together. Okay, so there it is. There's both lines, very, very Lydian heavy. I don't know if I would actually do this in real life, but obviously this piece of vocabulary, I've written these pieces of vocabulary trying to sort of like go over the top with the Lydian sound, just so it really gets impressed upon, your fingers and your ears so that you can overdo it now so that in your solos you would have access to this. Now, there's a ton of other places that you could use this, but this is the one that I've chosen to because, again, it's like it just kind of serves up this sound to us very naturally in the chord progression. All right, so here it is on saxophone with a backing track, just so you can hear it complete and in time, a little bit faster and with some rhythm section behind it. All right, that's going to do it for this week. We will see you next week with our Tune of the Month episode. And always, if you have any questions, just let me know. And also, if you want to support the podcast, that's a great thing to do. It keeps these things coming out. And if you are a regular listener, you're going to get a lot of fantastic benefits from joining that membership. Go to patreon.com, search for the 10-Minute Jazz Lesson Podcast, or go to our website, 10minutejazzlesson.com, and click on one of the Patreon banners to get yourself signed up today and get instant access to everything that we have ever done over there. All right. Hope you're all staying safe and healthy. Have a great weekend, and we will see you next week. Bye, everyone.